In the first part of the Darklight recap episode, we explored the story and the narrative of Darklight, recapping what happens in the movie and the developments and the character moments and just the overall plot of the movie itself. In this part, the second part of the recap episode, we're going to be exploring the trivia elements of the behind-the-scenes making of the movie. So, let's get started. The first trivia point to note is that this is the first Agent 11 film to be shot on the Xbox One version of GTA 5. Indeed, Insurgency marked the end of shooting on the Xbox 360. It had been 6 movies that had been shot on the Xbox 360, that's including of course Bloodgrave, which was shot on GTA 4, and people might remember that the final scene of Insurgency was actually shot on the Xbox One to tease that transition, to tease the moving on to the Xbox One version of Grand Theft Auto 5. Indeed, so this transition happened and Darklight was completely shot on the Xbox One. There's only one shot in the movie that isn't. It's a developing shot of Oswald's mansion that happens in the second act of the movie. That was shot on PC at the time, but apart from that, basically the entire movie was shot on the Xbox One, and it marked a radical shift for Night Hunter Studios' production techniques and the capabilities it offered us as filmmakers. The next trivia point is that this is the last Agent 11 film to feature Joel Poynton as voicing Nico Bellic. Joel Poynton originally signed on to voice act Agent 11 in only 2 Machinimas, and Darklight was going to be his final film. That was always the plan, it was always going to happen, and so his departure was not a surprise to us within Night Hunter Studios. This, though, in a way, was a positive move, because Joel's tenure as Agent 11 is in itself an era within the franchise. Indeed, Joel brought this kind of coolness, this suaveness personality to his incarnation of Agent 11. It's a different form of Agent 11 than, say, Matthew White's version that's going on right now. And although it was a shame to see Joel Poynton leave the franchise, he did bring a really unique and interesting performance as Agent 11 to Darklight, and he ended this era on a really high note. And we were really thankful to work with Joel on the new era of the Agent 11 franchise that included voice acting, and to this day we're still hugely thankful for Joel Poynton for helping us out with voicing Nico Bellic. The third trivia point is that Darklight was originally titled Honor for All. Indeed, there were multiple drafts of what came to be Darklight, and the first few drafts of the script were actually titled Honor for All. This was both a reference to Insurgency, when the fighter pilot crashed and hailed Honor for All, upon crashing of course, and a reference also to what the Honor soldiers proclaim before they go into battle, that being the phrase Honor for All. It is in a way an identification with the organisation Honor. However, this title was dropped in favour of Darklight, and the reason being was because it had more relation to both the narrative and the themes of the story itself. Darklight, of course, being a form of juxtaposition, which echoes the FIB versus Honor narrative and their juxtaposing views on the world and how the world should run. The FIB, of course, arguing and pursuing a world of law and order, and Honor pursuing a world full of their tyrannical authoritarian viewpoint on what the world should look like. This, on the whole, influenced our decision to rename the movie Darklight, and to this day, actually, I must say from a personal perspective, it is one of my favourite names of these movies that we've done. I really like the name, I really like the theme and the overall image that Darklight produced in terms of its promotional content and the overall movie itself. The next behind-the-scenes trivia point is that production on Darklight actually shut down for a number of weeks to rewrite the third act of the movie. The original third act simply finished at the airfield, with Hessler being killed by the propellers in place of Ronson. However, this ending didn't correlate to the wider narrative that the franchise was aiming for, and so the third act had to be rewritten. Therefore, production shut down for about 2 weeks or so to figure out a more appropriate climax for the movie. And whilst we were dreaming up of story ideas and action sequences to end the movie to, serve as the climax of the film, the idea of a boat versus helicopter pursuit, with Nico and the Spectre pursuing a fleeing Hessler, was suggested, and it just fit perfectly into the overall narrative and the structure of the film. And so this led to the rather twistful and iconic confrontation on the island between Hessler and Nico, with Hessler taunting Agent 11 about how he knew Nico's parents and how Honor will someday return. But it's interesting to note that that ending, that whole climax, that whole pursuit and confrontation on the island at the very end of the movie was in fact a product of production shutting down for a number of weeks just so we could redraft it and get the ending perfectly right. So just because production shut down and the ending was actually redrafted during production doesn't necessarily mean that that was a bad thing. It was in fact a very positive move for the movie, because overall it really did help us craft and shape the movie to fit in more with the franchise's overall story arc that we're going for. Now this one is more of a general trivia point. Darklight was inspired by a number of movies, of course, but mainly Quantum of Solace, Die Another Day, Spectre and Skyfall. And these were inspirations that we were set out to include from the get-go whilst writing the first drafts of the script. And so the more underground, kind of under the radar storylines from both Die Another Day and Skyfall were considered, and the more organisation toppling, all-out warfare elements from Quantum and Spectre were also included in the scripts. And altogether, it rather created a different story than what we had done before. It was a story about revenge, both for individual people and for the agency as a unit, and it was a story about redemption. Redemption, of course, being, say, the Spectre's return and his acknowledgement of his mistakes that he did in Insurgency, whilst also redeeming himself in the eyes of both Nico and the FIB by helping them take down Hessler and Honor as the organisation. And so these story elements from these movies, all of which influenced and inspired Darklight in terms of its structure, its theme, its character development and so forth. The sixth trivia point is that this was yet another direct sequel in the Agent 11 franchise. It continued the story that was told in Insurgency. Unlike most other entries in the franchise, Darklight is a true sequel to Insurgency. Because it's important to remember that at the very end of Insurgency, the sixth film in the franchise, Nico had taken Karen's phone out of suspicion, and he traced a message she received from a Mr. Hessler to Italy. And there, he intercepted the mysterious individual and kidnapped him. And so Darklight picks up literally moments after the end of Insurgency, with Nico escaping Italy with Mr. Hessler, whilst Honor units attempt to stop him. And this, again, this direct sequel is a really important point to note, because we don't do sequels that often. We don't really enjoy doing them. Sequels tend to be hit or miss, as everybody knows watching, say, Hollywood movies and other Machinimas and so forth. But for us, it was really important that this film continued the story that we were telling. Again, as I mentioned earlier, Joel Poynton's two-movie arc really is an arc. It's an era. It is telling a story within itself. And although the franchise has an overall story arc, Joel Poynton's venture as Agent 11 really had its own story going for it, and Darklight is that second part of that story. The next behind-the-scenes trivia point is that Darklight features one of the longest pre-production phases in our history in terms of Niner Studios and our overall venture into machinima making. Indeed, work on Darklight began midway during Insurgency's production, with scripts being created left, right and centre, and the overall story being crafted, as I mentioned, whilst Insurgency was actually filming. And so pre-production was a more in-depth process compared to previous entries, with us creating more intricate characters and their overall designs, and different costume ideas. Behind the scenes pictures, of course, can be seen on screen now of this. We really did experiment with different clothing and different styles for different characters and so forth. Spent a long time trying to get the image of these characters right. And just another story that I can tell you, of course, about this really lengthy pre-production process is that Ewan Ward, the film stunt director, and the team spent a good month selecting the right vehicles for the movie. A whole month just choosing the vehicles that the protagonist and the antagonist was going to use in the car chase. At first, the choice was for Nico Bellic to drive a silver Coquette, and Mr. Drax was going to pursue him in an orange Vatcha. But then, whilst we were doing stunt training and practicing the car chase route, the Rapper GT Cabrio and the Bullet GT were the more preferable options to use. And so overall, the pre-production process, both from script writing all the way to set design and prop creation, all took the better part of a year to complete. And it is, to this day, one of the longest pre-production phases in Niner Studios' history. The final trivia point to mention is that this is Riley Hooper's third collaboration with Niner Studios doing GFX and VFX work. Darklight marked Riley Hooper's third collaboration with us, after doing some amazing work on both Retribution and Insurgency. However, in Darklight, Riley adopted a more expansive position this time, creating not just film posters and album artwork, all of which you can see on screen now, but also VFX items that were used in the actual movie. So for instance, we drew up a diagram of what the Rapper GT's gadget dashboard should look like, and you can see the actual picture we sent to Riley. This is a paper design we created, just what the dashboard should look like. And then Riley created a more digital, in-game version that went into the movie. Additionally, although another GFX artist created the original logo for Darklight, Riley adapted it into various forms throughout the movie, and you can see this on, say, computer screens, phones, and so forth. The logo was incorporated into the movie for the very first time. And so overall, Riley's artistic contribution really elevated the movie and set it apart from Insurgency, raising the bar for future GFX and VFX work within the Agent 11 franchise. And that concludes the behind the scenes trivia recap for Darklight, and indeed the overall recap episode for the 7th movie in the franchise. Join us next week as we recap Black Phantom, the first movie voiced by Matthew White, who then plays the new incarnation of Agent 11, and the first movie in the Agent 11 franchise to use the Rockstar editor, and to this day is the single most successful and critically acclaimed machinima Niner Studios has ever made. So guys, thank you very much for watching this video, and we hope to see you in the next one. Goodbye.